Hi there, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay. Just tell me if you can hear me or message me because I'm not sure I can hear you. Okay. Okay. It sounds like you can hear me. Thanks, Tony. Okay. So I'm just going to go ahead and start. Tony, you'll need to message me or something if somebody's got questions because I can't hear you guys. So I'm just going to start and I'm going to plow on through and just let me know if there are any questions that you have. Okay. So can you guys see the second slide with my face on it? Okay, great. So I'm just going to get started. Just a quick introduction to who I am. My name is Raj Jha. I have found, scaled, and sold an agency, particularly with an eye to being as founder hands-off as possible. In the early days, I had my dirty little hands in everything. And then over time, I systematized, I created processes so I didn't have to be involved day-to-day in sales. I didn't have to be involved day-to-day in the delivery. So much so that my transaction selling was actually a two-part transaction. I first sold 51% of the business. And then within 60 days, I essentially was out and just they were sending me checks. So the great thing about doing this, setting it up this way, is that you can actually detach from the business and elevate yourself. And what we're going to talk about today is how you do that, how to think about that, and some of the challenges that you might have getting there. And then a few little tricks that I've used to little thinking tools to do that for your agency. I founded 3 different businesses, been a senior corporate exec in a bunch of companies. I used to be a corporate attorney and represented Facebook, Yahoo, Electronic Arts. And that's kind of the summary of it. So what we're going to talk about today is, first of all, why your agency isn't worth what you think. In fact, it might be unsellable. And that's a really important thing to know now because now you can do something about it. The problem with focusing on more revenue is the second thing we're going to talk about, because it's not always about revenue when you're thinking about enterprise value. That's a piece of the puzzle, but there are actually some more important pieces of the puzzle for most of the folks in the room. The next thing, proper systems. They can make your business not easier to just sell, but to also easier to run. And last, how to increase your valuation 3 to 5 times using what I'll call the 7 levers framework, which I'm going to get to at the end of this presentation. So why is this all important? What an agency wants is that what an agency acquirer wants is an agency that's profitable and predictable. It's easy to run. Think about it. They don't want something that's everyone's running around with their hair on fire, where nothing is organized. Who wants that asset, right? But if it is profitable, predictable, easy to run, that's going to get a much higher valuation, right? But that's what you want too. So whether or not you are building to sell, whether or not you think you want to sell in 12 to 18 months, 3 to 5 years, 10 years, if you focus on the same things that I'm going to talk about today, you get a better agency today, and you get one that you have the option to sell. And that's a really important distinction, because I think a lot of agency owners think that selling is a long way away, or I'm going to run this thing forever, and not realizing that just having that mentality of putting in place systems and processes and thinking and the metrics and all the things we're going to talk about today actually will help you regardless of if you want to sell. So let's start out with what your agency is really worth. This may be introductory material for some folks. If you've been at it for a while, you might have heard this a few times, but let's go through it because I think it's really important, even if you already heard this, to understand what the numbers really are. Because most of your future net worth is tied up in the agency. Unfortunately, it might never get unlocked. You're building something, but you're spending a lot of time building for clients, but are you building for yourself? Are you building an asset? And it's a lot more obvious in product businesses and real estate and various other kinds of businesses that you're actually building assets. In a services business, and I've run multiple services businesses, it's harder to know if you're actually building an asset because you're so caught up in the day-to-day and the servicing of the client that you stop thinking about whether or not the agency itself, the business, the asset has value for you. And it should more than just cash flow on a regular basis. So I'm going to encourage you, first of all, to have this little reality check and realize you're plowing your blood, sweat, and years into this asset, So you really want to come out the other side with something. It should be more than just for cash flow, or at least the potential for more than cash flow, even if you're not thinking about selling today. So, sobering fact, less than 1 in 10 agencies are sold. So that hopefully will not be you guys, but 9 out of 10 are not sold. And they're not because they're not sellable, because the owner has not separated themselves from the business, or because margins are too thin, or because they just aren't interesting in one way or another. You have to have an agency that is large enough to be interesting, has enough margins, has enough stability, and isn't dependent on you. And the vast majority of agencies, even many that get into the $2-3 million range, still might not be sellable for these reasons. So take this seriously. So let's talk a little bit about what your agency might be worth. And the very simplified version of this is the valuation, that is what your agency is worth and what somebody might pay for it, is worth the profit, what the actual net profit is, the money that you take out at the end, times a number called the multiple. Okay. And the multiple is a reflection of kind of how good your business is for the acquirer and the industry and the market and all those things. So this is the super simplified formula. But we always have to keep in mind, we want to know why an acquirer is buying. So they're paying for what? They're paying for a future cash flow. They're not paying for your brand. You might love your brand. They're not paying for any of your logo or the fact that you love your baby. They are paying for future cash flows. The reason why they're going to cut a check is because they believe they can get more money tomorrow, whether that's synergies with their existing agency, if it's an agency buyer, if it's a private equity firm, they think that they're going to cash flow it and actually be able to improve operations, invest a little bit and scale it, regardless of what it is. The reason why the transaction happens, unless it's a very, very small agency and someone just buying a job, any material transaction is going to be because they want the future cash flow from your agency. That means they're paying for certainty. They want certainty. And so the profit that you get, that's a historical number, right? They're going to look backwards and they're going to look at that number and say, okay, what's your last 12 months EBITDA? What's your last 3 years? Is it on an upward trend? But the multiple is reflecting the certainty of success in the future, the probability that profit is going to continue into the future. And the less they think it is, the lower that multiple is going to be. And also the worse other terms are going to be, such as earnouts. We're not going to get into that in this discussion, but the lower the multiple is going to be. So let's just do 2 really quick examples. If you have not gone through this before, got 2 agencies. One makes more money than the other in profit. Agency number 1, 2 million in EBITDA. That's profit. The client engagements are custom scoped. So every client engagement is unique. The sales process might vary. Sometimes they might have a founder doing the sales. They've got a sales guy doing the sales. It's just kind of they're all juggling it between each other. And the owner is very involved, got the dirty little paws and everything, just like I did for the first 2 years of my business. So that might get a multiple of 1.6. Agency number 2 makes less profit, 1.7 million. Client engagements are consistent. Sales process is defined. It's on rails. It is the same every single time. And because the entire business is process driven, the owner is not needed, does not need to be involved. Multiple 3.6. Look at the difference in results here. So it's not a huge gap in EBITDA, but look at the result that you get, 3.2 million versus 6.12 million because of the multiple. So I can't stress it enough. The multiple is really what you need to focus on, not necessarily driving your top line revenue and trying to squeeze out more margin out of that. So the multiple matters the most. And you can make your agency worth a lot more by just increasing the multiple. Even if you get no more clients, you can keep steady. Not that you should do this, but you could keep steady, work internally on the business, get the multiple to go up, and you will have a better exit. So most of you are focused on increasing profit because that's the easy thing. It's the obvious thing. But the thing that matters most is that getting that multiple number up. Okay, so that is the fast track. So how do you do that? Well, you need to increase the multiple. How do you do that? So there's some things you cannot control, and we are going to set those aside. But most importantly, and I think everyone needs to be aware of this as well, a huge, huge determinant of how much you're going to get is going to be based on what the market is. So you can't control that, but the macroeconomic conditions has a major influence, sometimes like 3 times the difference in the outcomes in terms of the multiples you'll get based on whether the market is in a down cycle or an up cycle. So, and these tend to go in 5 to 7 year waves. So that's a big piece of it. We can't control for it. You need to be aware of it because we're just coming off of a high. So agencies that I saw that were exiting in mid 2022 had multiples probably 2x what they do right now. Market's more scared. Now, if you get larger and larger, that gets to be less and less of a risk. But if you're in the 2 million to 10 million zone, this has a pretty pronounced effect on how many offers you're going to get, how good they're going to be. So we can't control all of those things, just be aware that they exist. So the question is, what can we control so that we can get the agency to the point where we have the best odds of success when I need to have an exit? So this is just a little diagram taken from one of the programs that I run, and it is what are the influencing factors? So when we look at an agency, we're looking at people and processes, we're looking at product, we're looking at promotion, which is marketing and sales, and we're looking at the profit, how that's driving profit. And when you kind of overlay, we work on a 3-year timeline. When you kind of overlay these segments with, is it multiple or is it profit that is really driving the core driver of increasing exit value? Multiple lands in more of those buckets. So it's just another visualization showing how important it is, because you can drive multiple with better product. You can drive multiple with better processes, with better people. These are all things that can drive the multiple. And do they have an indirect benefit in terms of the profit that you earn? Yes, 100%. However, multiple is really driving most of it. So to recap that one, what can you control? So it's the right people, the right process, the right product, the right promotion. So do you have the right staff doing the work? And that involves owner independence, as I talk about it. It is, does the owner need to be doing all kinds of things, or can the owner take a vacation? I actually go through this exercise with a lot of my clients, which is, we call it management by vacation. We say, okay, if you went away for 1 week, what would break? All right, let's go fix that. Now you're going to be away for 2 weeks. What would break? Now a month, now a quarter, now a year. And as this goes out and out and out, you start to fix more and more things so that you can be away from the business for longer. And that involves the right people and processes mostly. Okay, so you get the right staff, you've got a process that is highly repeatable, or if it is not repeatable, process can be created by the right people without you having to do it. And this is another core aspect of it. Do you have systems that create systems? In other words, do you have to be there, like writing the SOPs there, saying if this happens, then this happens? Well, in the early days, yes, certainly. But once you're getting larger, you should have a learning organization that does that, because that, again, will free you when there is a methodology that the staff uses to create processes that you might not even know exist. Product, how is the service packaged and offered? That can make a big difference in multiple as well. Promotion, is there a client acquisition system? I've had, four conversations with agency owners just this week, and 0 of them had a client acquisition system. 2 of them were completely reliant on organic referrals. 2 were doing some vague form of outbound, but it was inconsistent. So is there a client acquisition system, which doesn't just mean, we're talking about sales agencies today, right? So it's not just what you are doing for your clients, but it's a full follow-up of marketing and sales and nurture and the entire sales process being dialed in. I'll give an example in a little bit when I talk about one client experience that we had. All right, bottom line, are these systematized? You can get this slide from the downloads in the Air Meet or what have you, so that you can take this with you and use it at home. But what systems do you need? This is the high-level systems that you need. We'll talk in a moment about how to prioritize that and the importance of this. But in general, when I'm looking at an agency, these are the kinds of things that I'm diligencing. Do they have an interview system? a hiring system, a retention system, meeting system? Or let's go here because we're talking about sales agencies. So in the promotions group, do you have a system to validate that your positioning is correct and test it? Marketing system, sales system, all systems. All right. So again, I'm sure some people are taking pictures or scribbling furiously, but this will be in the handouts that the folks can get you. So a few examples. And so I wanted to have a case study because I think that's one of the best ways to learn. So this is one agency client that I systematized their sales and marketing process. Okay. Now, I'm going to encourage you to not look at the numbers and say, oh, I'm way bigger. Oh, I'm way smaller. It's an example. It is the principles to follow here because there's some people who get very nitpicky and say, I have a completely different situation. This is one representative example of something that I have done dozens and dozens and dozens of times. So don't take this as it only works for this size or this niche. This pretty much works for every case that I've seen. Sales systems. All right. A before and after snapshot. Unlike weight loss, you can't have a thin person and a large person next to each other. So you have to have text here. So before, the situation with this agency, for each new prospect, we ask them what they need and we build a proposal. Now that's a pretty standard process for most agencies. What it would look like afterwards. Whenever there's a new prospect, we never do a proposal or RFP. They pay us to go through our project definition process that is the same every time. And we make it clear that this is a required process to be a client. So we'll talk about what might be rattling around in some folks' brains about that can't possibly work, but this is what we did the before and after, and I'm going to show you the results of that. Traditional agency sales, you'll have a prospect that comes in the door and you make a proposal. You get paid a whopping $0 for that proposal. Then they're probably running some kind of bake-off and you do your dog and pony show and maybe 10% will convert into a client and you onboard that client. But now during the onboarding process, they're not sure what to expect and it takes a while and maybe takes a little too long. You haven't gathered the information and then you've got a certain average retention. In this case, for this client, it was 14 months. For you, it might be 5 months. For you, it might be 18 months. Again, it doesn't, the numbers don't matter. It's the principle here. So in this particular case, it was a $250,000 lifetime value of a client before they churned out. So the value per lead was $25,000. So we systematized it. Instead, when a prospect came in, we had a paid roadmap, or I believe in the cloud task world, you often call it a playbook. It's the same thing. You're developing a roadmap, a strategy, a playbook, you're being paid to develop, here's what you need to do on a consultative style basis, although it's highly templatized. And the prospects convert, in this case, at about 20% into that roadmap. And that's a $5,000 project. And then here's the thing that really changes the numbers. We got a 70% conversion from the roadmap to an actual ongoing client. It changed the nature of the relationship in two ways. Number one, buyers do not like to buy recurring stuff. It is really hard to do that. So putting a project in front of it will make the sale easier. Second of all, once they've opened their wallet for $5,000, do you think they're going to take that and just go with somebody else? No, they're either going to do it themselves or they're going to hire you. You can't help it if they're just going to do it themselves or they think it's too expensive or what have you, but you can predispose them to working with you. So what happens then? Your onboarding phase gets really short. It's much quicker because you've done the diligence that you would have done in onboarding. A lot of it is done on the roadmap and the playbook. So essentially, you're getting paid to do a piece of the onboarding, really learn the client, really understand what they want and what success looks like. Depending on the size of the client, you might start to understand the politics inside there. Is there a VP of sales? What's their incentive like? Are they on the way out and then you might just get kicked out? Are they who's the secondary contact that you're going to want it to know in order to stay in the account in case there is some change there? All of those things are relevant in the roadmap phase. Onboarding becomes quicker because the expectations are set. Then you've got an engagement and then you redo the roadmap at 12 months. Might just be a tweak, might be something else. In this particular case, it increased the LTV substantially and the value per lead went up. So how did we do this? So the first thing is we reoriented the founder that the goal is not more clients. It is a higher LTV. It is greater certainty, because what's going to drive that multiple is a longer tenure of each client, and they are worth more. And frankly, in my experience, it's a lot easier to operate an agency with fewer clients paying you a lot more money than a whole bunch of little clients that churn quickly. That's a really tough existence. I started there. I didn't end up there. And I was so much happier towards the end with larger clients. Second, we repositioned the company away from being a commodity. You will, if you do this, start to feel like you're saying no a lot, or you're chasing people away because there's a front-end commitment. What you're really doing is positioning yourself away from a commodity. When you can tell a client, I'm sorry, I will not work with you unless I understand what we're getting into together, because we will not be successful, that positions you as an expert. So refusing to work with people unless they go through this process in which everyone is very clear about what success looks like and what their internal resourcing is, right? Because you can go ahead and generate a bunch of leads, and if they can't close them, you don't know. Do you really know their internal metrics? If you're doing outsourced SDRs and they're doing a bunch of calling and their AEs are not closing, do you know historically what they close from different lead sources? How can you set it up so that they will understand what success should look like? So that's how you don't become a commodity. Reduced expectation gap between sale and delivery. This process forces them to think. I know they hate to think. They don't like to take the time to think, but it forces them to think so that when you hit the ground running, it is faster and it is more of what they expect. We re-engineered the sales process to not need owner time. So this entire roadmap process wasn't even done by the owner. Before this, he was doing all the sales. After this, he had an account manager doing the sales, and he, frankly, I don't think he even talks to new clients anymore, unless it's, once a quarter, hey, how's it going? And that's it. We deployed more powerful sales psychology during the sales process. This is the thing, the positioning thing I talked about earlier. It's a little bit of a takeaway sale. Really, you're saying, if you're not serious about understanding what the success metrics are, then we are not the place for you. What that does is reinforces that you are a premium provider and allows you more price elasticity when you actually get to the engagement. Because at the beginning, if you're just like, sure, I'll take you, we'll go right into it, all you're doing is competing with everybody else who's offering the same thing. And then they're going to essentially compare it on dollars per hour or whatever metric that they're looking at. And it's a race to the bottom. You just want to opt out of that game. And that's what this lets you do. And then we re-engineered the services menu for higher margin and larger retainers, essentially because during this scoping process at the beginning, we could take a deep dive into what does the customer actually want. We could then look for ways in order to have the services that they get guided towards the services that are the highest margin and that we are the best at. So instead of them coming in saying, we want X, you say, stop. Okay, I understand you think you want X, but let's make sure that the process that we give is going to get you the actual business KPIs you're trying to hit, instead of, I want 5 bodies or I want this many leads. Do we really know that? No, you want this much output in terms of revenue. So how do we get you there? And it may be a different combination. In this case, there was a combination. Oh, well, we could also sell the following marketing component, which had way higher margin. And that's what you can do to re-engineer the service menu. Common fears and misconceptions. I include this because these are the questions that I most commonly hear from doing things like this. And we're talking the sales context, but process is throughout the agency if you're doing this. My market is different and they won't do that. Yes, they will. I did this. My first career, actually my second career, was as a lawyer. Lawyers, you'll say, oh, they always bill by the hour, don't they? Well, no, we build on this model as lawyers. And every law firm says they won't do that. But we could routinely get $30,000 a month engagements, which had insane margins because we positioned this way. You can do it in any market. So why would the close rate to a roadmap be more than from a proposal? it really changes the power dynamic. You will get people saying, I won't do that. And you have to be comfortable with saying, okay, we're not a fit. But what you will get is that the people who do come through the door are going to be way better clients. So, and then the last thing is, I'm afraid that this is too specific. It's specific client type, specific service type, specificity of your client type, and making a process that I am just targeting. I'm just going to pick something now. B2B SaaS companies. And thus I can have a roadmap for that is going to make it way more attractive. And just as an aside, when you're using a marketplace, because we're all in the cloud task universe here, when you're using a marketplace, there is no reason why you can't have multiple different ideal client profiles. Maybe you can do this for pharma and for SaaS. That's fine. Make it a different package. Make the roadmap a different package, because it has the same effect. Think, the customer says, this is for me. Okay. I'm going to have to pick up the pace here to make this. So I'm going to go real quick here. Magic of compounding. This is the 7 lever system. These are some of the things that I do with agencies to get them to scale. Here's the basic math. If you fix 7 parts of your business, adding 10%, you nearly double the business profits. All right. So the fix can be anything. It can be increasing revenue. It can be decreasing your cost. It can be increasing retention. You just have to find 7 things that are the right dials for you to turn, and you only have to do 10% turns on each one. It's a lot easier to do this than to try to double by doubling your top line revenue. That is much harder. If you do it this way, little tweaks can, little hinges swing big doors, as they say. Okay. You do this by systematizing, productizing as you go. And in the process, you are not only going to double the business, but you are going to increase the multiple, because all of these non-top line revenue things are actually going to give you a bigger swing on the multiple. So what are those things? You'd have to pick from this list. All right. You'd revisit the list and you say, what are the things I'm going to try to compound here? On the how to do it, we're running out of time here, but not all fixes are the same. Okay. Some will accelerate others. In other words, the sequencing of the fixings matters. So you don't just go from the top to the bottom of that list. You have to have a critical thinking process of which ones should I do first, because it'll have a good trickle down effect on all the next ones that I'm going to do, and it'll compound faster. Okay. So make sure you understand not the fact that just there are 7 levers and here's a list of things to do, but understand the interactions between all of them and think about that deeply before you jump in order to make sure you're getting the fastest acceleration due to this model. Okay. If you'd like a more detailed roadmap, I've got free resources. I've got all kinds of stuff. There's the website where you can drop me a note. We do have various kinds of maps and charts and other things like that. So if that is interesting to anyone, you can go to the website. You can shoot me a note. There's also a resource in the Air Meet room as well for you guys. So let me figure out if I can stop sharing. There we go. So yeah, I see a question, but I can't hear you. So you might have to type. Okay. Hold on 1 second. Hey, Tony, do I have to call you? Because I can't hear anybody here. No, I cannot hear you. Okay. You guys have to open up the audio.
Charging for the roadmap or the playbook. I do something similar to that with my consulting business. My question for you though is, if you find that the customer at the end of that is going to be a bad customer, like it's not the right fit for you, but they still want to go forward, how do you handle that?
I have I'm very strict about that, and I just don't take them. So I have partnerships with other agencies, and I might get a referral fee. So I would just not take them. Life is too short for bad fit clients. And goodbye, thank you. Go darken someone else's door. If they're terrible, I'll send them to a competitor. Well, if it's I mean, for the roadmap, yes, you're being paid for the roadmap. Um, and because there is work that's being done there, and it's important work. I find that a lot of the times during the roadmap, it is the realizations that the client has about their own business and their own process that is some of the most valuable stuff. It is more valuable, in my opinion, than a lot of the doing of the work. Because if someone's coming to you and they're just hiring a bunch of reps to do something and you're essentially staffing it, that is, to a degree, commodity work. What is not commodity work is helping them suggest process improvements in their sales funnel, ways in which to use those leads and flush them back through marketing. Those things are big levers, that those aha moments that you're going to want to do this again in a year or in a quarter or whenever you do these things, because that little consulting layer is what will give you huge margins and their priced elasticity on the actual engagement. They will pay a premium because of the thinking that you did or that your account manager did for a 3-hour meeting in which they had a bunch of insights.
Great presentation. Question about productizing your delivery.
Yes.
So I run an outbound agency where we only do cold email campaigns. We send 250 emails a day for everybody, but each campaign has creative energy spent on it every time to make the campaign 100% custom team plan.
Yes.
We have another playbook that's just for marketing. And so, is it productized enough to have the scope of we send 250 emails a day, this is what it looks like, but we have campaign strategy on top of it? Or does it have to be so productized that it's the same campaign for everybody?
No, it does not have to be the same campaign for everybody. I'll give you one other thought, though. You can productize that more by putting more on the client. So one way to productize is not to turn everything into a template, but is to say, hey, client, instead of me developing this for you, I'm going to take you through a process, which is almost like online education. And you're going to fill in the following 8 things. And that's going to give you the piece parts that you need in order to do it in a more processized way. So instead of what now might be an interview process, and then you've got your copywriters going back and writing it, can you extract all of that information in a highly programmatic way to improve that process and shorten it? That way of productizing also helps. But the short answer is none of that is required to sell. It's just another step that'll get you more margin and probably get better results.
Yeah, we have a form for that.
Great. Fantastic.
That's actually awesome that you said that. We really appreciate that.
Yes, I can.
So you talked about getting the owner.
Okay. Yeah. Well, you're sorry about that. So you're not alone at all. It is totally normal to be in the weeds. The question is, how do you systematically delegate, not abdicate, but delegate things? The way that I typically think about that problem is, if I had to fly with just IVR, I had to fly just with my instruments. I have to just look at some dials. What are the 5 dials that I would need to know about the health of the business? And then let's take that down a notch. Each dial is a responsibility of a person or a team. How do I make it so that I'm just running by metrics? And over time, I'm handing off the responsibility for hitting a number to somebody else on the team. And then I have a very simple conversation. What's the number? Is it red, yellow, green? And then if it's not green, why? And they have to figure out why. So your job is to push all of that decision making down to the next level But until you find out what those dials are for your particular business, you can't do that. And then instead, you end up delegating just random stuff. So think about what those dials are, and then think about what your time sucks are. What are the things where you can free up the most time and you can have a cost-effective person helping you? Like, for instance, for most people in this room, if you don't have an assistant, that can be the highest leverage thing that you could possibly pay for right now. So think about it that way. So top down and bottom up.